I remember the first time I saw her holding my daughter in her arms. My daughter. But she said it like it was hers. And then, the world around me seemed to freeze, everyone else smiling, nodding, thinking this was perfectly fine. But my chest tightened, my heart racing, and I realized this was not just about a picture on social media. This was about my daughter, my love, my life, and somehow, I was being pushed aside. It was late December of 2024 when the world as I knew it shifted completely. Emily, my tiny, fragile, beautiful daughter, was finally here. I remember the first moment I held her, the way her weight settled into my arms, delicate, yet so real. It felt like holding the universe in my hands, and for a moment, nothing else existed. Her skin was soft, impossibly smooth, and the faint warmth of her body against mine was intoxicating. Each breath she took was a reminder that life could be so perfect, so terrifying, all at once. I whispered promises to her, promises I wasn't even sure I could keep, to protect her, to love her endlessly, to never let anything or anyone hurt her. The early days were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Every small sound she made, the tiniest whimper, the softest sigh, even the subtle shifting of her fingers felt like a secret only I was privileged to witness. Jake, my husband, was there with me in the quiet moments, his presence, steady, calming. He was 28, a year older than me, with the kind of quiet strength that could anchor a storm. Watching him cradle Emily for the first time, seeing the slight tremble in his hands, the softness in his eyes, I realized the depth of our partnership not just as spouses, but as parents navigating a world completely unknown to us. The nursery was bathed in a warm glow, soft shadows stretching across the walls from the small lamp by the rocking chair. I had spent countless hours imagining this room, picking every detail with care: soft cream walls, the pale lavender mobile above the crib, Emily's tiny clothes neatly folded in the drawers. Now that it was real, it felt almost sacred. Each morning I would stand there, cup her tiny face in my hands, and marvel at the miracle of her existence. But the serenity of our little world was fragile. I had known family dynamics could be tricky, but nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. Lily, my 21-year-old sister-in-law, had recently experienced a devastating miscarriage earlier in the year. She tried to carry herself with smiles and brightness, sharing pictures on social media, trying to mask the emptiness that followed her everywhere. But Emily seemed to awaken something in her, an unspoken longing, a desperate need to cling to life where hers had been lost. At first, I tried to be understanding. Lily's attention toward Emily was tender, careful, filled with the kind of love only someone who had known loss could understand. She would sit for hours, holding Emily, softly humming or talking to her, memorizing every detail of her tiny hands, her little fingers curling around hers. I told myself that her affection was harmless, that grieving through Emily's presence might be her way of coping, and yet, there was a subtle, almost imperceptible tension that began to thread itself through our lives. The first time she posted a photo of Emily online with the caption, "My little world," my stomach dropped. My chest tightened, a cold pulse of anxiety spreading through me. She didn't mean it in malice, I reasoned, just grief, just longing, but something inside me recoiled. And when her boyfriend commented, "She's my little girl too," it was like a spark ignited in a place I didn't want anyone else to see. Possessiveness, fear, and a strange, overwhelming jealousy. I tried to ignore it. I reminded myself that love could be expressed in many ways, that grief often manifests unpredictably, and that Lily's heartbreak was real. But as the days passed, her hold over Emily became more pronounced. Every time I reached for my daughter, Lily would subtly or sometimes not so subtly shift Emily closer, holding her in her arms, refusing to let go until Jake or my mother-in-law intervened. Jake's reaction, though well-intentioned, left me feeling isolated. "She's grieving," he said gently. "She loves Emily. That's all that matters." I understood the sentiment, I truly did. But understanding didn't ease the tightening in my chest. The fear that my own daughter was slipping further away from me. One smile, one post, one whispered word at a time. One night, the tension reached its peak. Emily had been in Lily's arms for what felt like hours, content, warm, safe, but not with me. I paced the living room, my heart hammering, my mind racing. I wanted to snatch her up, to reclaim the space that should have been mine. But I didn't, I couldn't, because this was my family, because I had to navigate this delicately, because I was supposed to be the bigger person. And yet, the bond I felt with Emily, the bond that should have been unshakable, felt like it was being tested in ways I couldn't have predicted. That night, I understood something fundamental. Being a mother wasn't just about feeding, changing diapers, or comforting. It was about protecting the sacred, intangible connection between myself and my child, a connection that no one else should be able to claim. And yet, I was learning, painfully, that love, even pure, unselfish love, could be complicated, threatened, even by those who claim to care most. The first signs of tension didn't arrive like a storm. They crept in slowly, like shadows stretching across the nursery walls as the sun dipped behind the winter skyline. At first, it was subtle. Lily would stay a little longer than necessary, her arms around Emily while I stood in the doorway, unsure if I should intervene. She would hum softly, her voice a low, comforting melody, and Emily would nuzzle her neck, cooing softly. My heart twisted in ways I couldn't explain. It wasn't that Lily loved Emily too much. Love wasn't the problem. It was the way she claimed my daughter, as if the tiny baby in my arms belonged just as much to her. I remember the afternoon she first posted a picture of Emily on her social media. I hadn't been watching her closely, thinking I had time, thinking I had control. But there it was, glowing on my phone screen, Emily, wrapped in her favorite pink blanket, eyes wide, tiny fingers clenching. Lily's thumb. The caption read, "My little world," and the comments, "Jake's sister's boyfriend, a friend from college." Random acquaintances all calling her mom, all reinforcing this narrative that felt like it was pulling my daughter away. I stared at the phone in disbelief. My chest felt tight. My fingers trembled, gripping the edges of the table. I wanted to scream, to demand, to reclaim what was mine. But I didn't. I reminded myself that Lily had lost her baby, that grief could make people do strange things, that love wasn't a finite resource. And yet, my gut clenched with the undeniable truth. My boundaries had already been crossed. Lily's presence became a constant pull in my life, a shadow I couldn't escape. Every day, she found ways to insert herself into Emily's routines. Feeding times, nap times, diaper changes, nothing was sacred. She would insist on holding Emily while I prepared her bottles, brushing off my hands with a quick, "I've got her. It's okay." And I would stand there, paralyzed, feeling the surge of helplessness and anger, unsure how to assert myself without seeming petty, cruel, or jealous. Jake, as always, tried to mediate, but mediation felt like betrayal. "She's grieving," he would say, his tone gentle but firm. "She loves Emily. That's enough." His words were meant to soothe, but all they did was make me feel isolated. How could he not see what I saw? How could he not feel the subtle but growing tension? The way Lily's hands lingered a fraction too long, the way her gaze locked onto Emily with a possessiveness that made my stomach churn. I began keeping mental notes, cataloging every interaction, every subtle overstep. The afternoon, Lily took Emily into the living room while I was still feeding her, insisting I needed a break even though I hadn't asked for one, was a turning point. I remember standing there, hands gripping the edge of the couch, staring at my daughter nestled in Lily's arms. She smiled at Emily, cooed, and whispered words I couldn't hear but could feel, a possessive tenderness that set off a surge of alarm in me. The following days were no better. Social media became a battleground. Each post Lily made, each comment she received, felt like a declaration of ownership over Emily. Friends, family, and even strangers responded with admiration, reinforcing a narrative that made me feel invisible in my own life. The jealousy, though I hated to admit it, coiled around my heart like a live wire. And yet, I could not act rashly. I needed a plan, a strategy, something that allowed me to reclaim my daughter without creating irreparable damage within the family. I started with small acts of reclaiming space. I spent extra time with Emily during the quiet mornings, cradling her in the rocking chair, talking to her in whispers that only she and I could understand. I memorized every tiny detail, the way her eyelashes curled against her cheeks, the faint freckles on her knuckles, the soft squeak of her socks against the nursery floor. I wanted to imprint my presence, to establish a bond so strong that no one could erase it. But Lily was persistent. She seemed to sense my attempts, and each time I succeeded in creating a private moment with Emily, she would appear, gentle at first, then gradually more insistent. "Can I hold her for just a moment?" she would ask, eyes wide, voice soft, impossible to deny. And before I knew it, Emily was back in her arms, cooing, safe, happy, and I was left standing there, my own child just out of reach. The tension escalated during family dinners. Emily, usually sleepy and calm, would suddenly be the center of a silent tug of war. Lily would insist on holding her, positioning her on her lap with an ease that made the rest of us pause. Jake would gently remind her that I had been caring for Emily all day, yet even his gentle reminders were met with subtle defiance. I watched my daughter smile up at Lily, gurgling in delight, and my chest ached. It wasn't hate. I loved Lily in my own way, but I couldn't ignore the way her presence overshadowed me in moments that should have belonged solely to Emily and me. In the quiet of the nursery at night, I would lie awake, listening to Emily's soft breathing through the baby monitor. I reflected on the day, cataloging each overstep, each moment of subtle possession. I tried to understand Lily, to empathize with her loss and her grief, but the growing knot of frustration in my chest was impossible to ignore. I felt like an intruder in my own home, a visitor in my daughter's life, and it terrified me. Then came the night of the incident I could never forget. Emily was fussy, refusing to settle in my arms despite my soft coos and gentle rocking. Lily appeared, seemingly by chance, and took Emily from me. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost rehearsed, as if she knew precisely how to assert her presence without overtly challenging me. Emily calmed immediately, snuggling against Lily's shoulder, eyes drooping in sleep. I stood frozen, unable to reclaim her without causing a scene, while Jake, unaware of the undercurrent of tension, poured himself a glass of water in the kitchen. It was in that moment, as I watched Emily drift into sleep in Lily's arms, that a new understanding settled in me. Motherhood was not just about love, care, and devotion. It was also about boundaries, about protection, about establishing a line that no one else could cross. And if I failed to assert that line, even gently, I risked losing something far more important than a fleeting moment of control. I risked losing the sense of my rightful place in Emily's life. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks finally reached its breaking point one cold February afternoon. The sky outside our home was a dull gray, and the wind rattled the windows, as if echoing the storm I felt inside. Emily, my daughter, had been fussing intermittently all morning. Normally, I could soothe her with a gentle rock or a soft lullaby, but that day, nothing seemed to calm her. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and every nerve in my body was raw. Then Lily appeared. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself. She simply stepped into the nursery, smiling softly, arms open. "Can I hold her for a little while?" she asked, voice gentle, almost innocent. Her eyes, however, betrayed a steely determination, one I had come to recognize too well. I froze. My body wanted to react, to say no, to reclaim Emily immediately, but a voice inside whispered caution. I swallowed the rising tide of frustration and forced a calm tone. "I've been taking care of her all morning, Lily. She's settled with me." Lily tilted her head, smiling as if my words were a minor inconvenience. "I just want to help," she said. "She's so fussy. I can calm her down." Before I could respond, she stepped closer, and Emily, sensing the familiar arms, leaned into Lily without hesitation. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to pull her back, to assert my role as mother, but Lily's hands were firm, unyielding. And in that moment, I felt a surge of fear. I hadn't expected fear that my daughter, my very life, could be overshadowed by someone else's grief and claim. I watched helplessly as Lily walked to the rocking chair, seating herself with Emily in her arms. The baby's eyes, bright and trusting, met mine for a fleeting moment before closing in contentment. I stood frozen, a storm of anger, sorrow, and confusion raging inside. This wasn't just about holding Emily. It was about control, about boundaries, about the invisible line that separated mother and child, and Lily had crossed it. Jake entered the room, unsuspecting. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked, scanning the nursery with an absent-minded calm. She's taking Emily again," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling. Jake's expression softened. "She's grieving. She loves her. Let's not make this a bigger deal than it is." The words cut deeper than any harsh remark could have. Let's not make this a bigger deal? My daughter was right there, and my role, my bond, was being tested, and he seemed unaware of the depth of my anguish. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed. "Jake, it's not just about love. It's about boundaries. Emily needs stability, and This constant back and forth isn't healthy. I feel like I'm losing her. Jake hesitated, looking between Lily and me. I understand, but she's hurting. Can't you let her have a moment of comfort? I felt a tear slip down my cheek, a mixture of frustration and helplessness. Comfort is fine, I said, voice steadier than I felt. But possession? Control? That's not comfort. That's something else. Lily's smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of awareness in her eyes, a recognition that perhaps she had gone too far. But the damage was done. Emily's trust, delicate and newly formed, was being pulled in conflicting directions. I realized then that I could no longer remain passive. I had to assert myself, not with anger, but with clarity, with the authority of being her mother. The confrontation escalated subtly but surely over the next few days. Lily would insist on holding Emily during meals, at bedtime, even during short walks around the living room. She would post photos with captions implying ownership, comments from friends reinforcing her claim. I began documenting every interaction, every subtle overstep, every post on social media that blurred the lines of maternal claim. My emotions became a battlefield: love for my daughter, empathy for Lily's loss, fear of confrontation, and a simmering anger that I tried desperately to control. One evening, the tipping point came at dinner. The table was set, candles flickering softly, Emily in her high chair, attempting to feed herself with tiny, clumsy hands. Lily insisted on sitting beside her, guiding her hands, leaning in close. My hand twitched, wanting to intervene. Jake noticed my tension, but hesitated, unsure how to act. I took a deep breath, trying to channel every ounce of calm I had left. Emily, let's eat together, I said gently, taking her hand. Lily's smile stiffened, her eyes narrowing just slightly. She leaned back, crossing her arms, and I realized then that this was not a simple matter of care or grief. This was a test of boundaries, of recognition, of respect, and I had to stand firm. The room was quiet except for the soft clinking of silverware and Emily's occasional giggles. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes, every judgmental glance from extended family members. No one said anything. Everyone seemed to sense the tension, but no one acted. And in that quiet moment, I understood the enormity of what motherhood truly demanded: not just love and patience, but courage, clarity, and the willingness to assert one's role, even when it meant creating discomfort or conflict. Later that night, lying in bed beside Jake, I reflected on the day. The exhaustion in my body was nothing compared to the emotional toll I had endured. But amidst the chaos, I felt a growing clarity. I was Emily's mother. My love for her was not just physical care. It was protection, guidance, and the assertion of boundaries. And if I failed to claim that role, no amount of empathy or understanding for Lily would matter. The night after the dinner confrontation, the house was silent except for the soft hum of the heater and Emily's occasional whimpers in the monitor from her crib. I sat in the nursery, cradling her gently, my mind a tangled web of emotion. The events of the day had left me raw, a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and the heavy weight of responsibility. I traced her tiny fingers with my thumb, feeling the soft pulse of life beneath my touch, and thought, this bond, fragile and yet so profound, is mine to protect. I reflected on Lily, my sister-in-law. Her grief was undeniable, the shadow of her loss lingering in every glance, every touch she gave Emily. I understood that, intellectually and empathetically. But understanding did not make it easier to bear the subtle invasions into my motherly space. I loved Lily in my own way. I wanted her to heal, to find comfort, to feel hope again. Yet, I could not sacrifice my daughter's emotional ecosystem, the boundaries that defined her security and my role as her mother. I realized that motherhood is as much about protection as it is about love. Every gentle coo, every tiny yawn, every curl of Emily's fingers around mine was a reminder that my presence mattered not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. And if I allowed those boundaries to blur under the guise of compassion, I risked something greater than a single conflict. I risked diminishing the clarity of our bond. Jake had tried to mediate, trying to see both sides, balancing empathy for Lily's grief with support for me. But his words, though gentle, often left me feeling unseen, as if my own pain and anxiety were secondary to the situation. I struggled with this internally. Was I being unreasonable? Was I too sensitive? Or was this instinct, primal and raw, urging me to defend something sacred? I didn't have a clear answer, only the surging, relentless understanding that I had to assert my role without shattering family harmony. I reflected on the moments when Emily smiled at Lily, cooed in her arms, and for a fleeting second, I felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it nearly brought tears. But then I reminded myself, love is not a zero-sum game. My daughter could feel love from multiple people, but my presence, my influence, my voice, my touch needed to remain primary. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience, strategy, and courage. The emotional tug-of-war played itself over the following weeks in subtle but persistent ways. Lily would hover during Emily's bath, offer to feed her snacks she didn't need, linger in the nursery while I tried to establish our routine. Each time, I faced a choice: confront, negotiate, or allow. I learned quickly that confrontation required clarity, not anger. Negotiation required firmness, not resentment. And in each interaction, I was practicing the art of being a mother not just in care, but in authority, presence, and emotional consistency. I also reflected on the weight of empathy. Lily's loss was real, and I couldn't dismiss it. But empathy had limits. Protecting Emily, nurturing her sense of security, and establishing my maternal boundaries were not acts of cruelty, they were acts of love. They were necessary, fundamental, and non-negotiable. My heart could hold compassion for Lily while simultaneously asserting what was mine to claim. As I watched Emily drift into sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with mine, I recognized that this was the first step toward balance. The challenges of family dynamics, grief, and human desire for connection were not things I could erase, but I could navigate them. I could love, assert, and protect. And I would. The reflection continued late into the night. I pondered every conversation, every gentle tug, every shared smile, and every silent look. I considered the role Jake would play, the influence Lily could have, and the importance of establishing routines and boundaries early. The complexity of motherhood, of human relationships, and of empathy collided in my mind, forming a labyrinth I had to navigate with care. Finally, as I placed Emily back in her crib, her tiny fingers curling one last time around mine, I whispered softly, "I will protect you. I will love you. And I will guide you, no matter what challenges come, no matter how others claim they understand your world. You are mine, and my love is your shield." In that moment, I felt a fragile sense of clarity. The conflicts were far from resolved. Lily's grief and her claims over Emily would continue to test me, but for the first time, I recognized the strength within myself, the clarity of my purpose, and the unyielding necessity of boundaries in the sacred space of motherhood. This was not the end, it was the foundation, the preparation, and the understanding that love, protection, and empathy must coexist in a delicate, deliberate balance. The first time I scrolled through my social media feed that morning, I wasn't prepared for the punch to the chest. There it was, Emily, my daughter, swaddled in a soft, mint-colored blanket, smiling at the camera with Lily holding her. The caption read, "Our little girl, my everything." I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen, heart hammering. The world could see her, my child, in someone else's arms, someone else's narrative. My stomach churned. Each like, each comment, was a tiny needle, reminding me that the boundary I had painstakingly tried to maintain had been quietly erased for public consumption. Jake was sitting next to me on the couch, scrolling through his own feed, oblivious to the storm inside me. "She's just sharing her love," he said casually, glancing at me. "She's grieving, remember? It's harmless, harmless." The word echoed mockingly in my head. Harmless? This was my daughter, my love, my voice. My presence being framed and paraded in someone else's lens felt like erasure. I could almost see the invisible lines of claim being redrawn by every like and comment that called Lily mom. I tried to breathe. I tried to remind myself that empathy for Lily's loss was necessary, that grief made people act in ways they wouldn't otherwise, that compassion wasn't a weakness. And yet, my chest ached, tight and unrelenting. My mind raced, cataloging every post, every interaction, every subtle claim, and calculating the impact not just on me, but on Emily. I began to notice patterns. Lily didn't just post photos, she created stories. Morning snuggles with my little sunshine. She's finally laughing at my silly faces. My heart grows bigger every day, each caption a subtle assertion, each photo a quiet declaration. Emily was hers as much as mine. I felt a hot sting of anger and fear. The virtual world became a stage for private battles. Friends and distant relatives, unaware of the dynamics at play, commented freely, reinforcing Lily's narrative. "She's beautiful. Looks just like you, Lily. Your little angel is growing so fast." The words were innocent, but to me, they were a constant, public reminder that my daughter's life, her identity, was being filtered through someone else's lens. I spent hours staring at the screen, debating whether to comment, confront, or ignore. Each choice carried weight. To comment would risk a confrontation I wasn't sure I could control. To ignore felt like surrender. To confront meant exposing private pain to the public eye, something I had no desire to do. I tried to focus on the positive. Emily was smiling, happy, safe. Lily's intentions at their core were loving. And yet, my protective instinct, primal and unyielding, screamed at me that love alone wasn't enough to justify overstepping boundaries. Love did not give someone the right to erase another mother's presence. I remember pacing the living room that morning, Emily sleeping quietly in her crib, while I scrolled through the posts over and over. Each photo was a mirror, reflecting not just Lily's grief and need, but my own fears, insecurities, and the raw vulnerability of being a mother. My heart ached for the balance I was trying to maintain: empathy for Lily, protection for Emily, and self-respect for myself. Even Jake seemed distant, absorbed in his own interpretation of the situation. "Don't make it a bigger deal than it is," he said again, and I felt a wave of isolation wash over me. He was right in a way. It wasn't a disaster. No one was hurt. Emily was safe, but emotionally, psychologically, it felt like a small invasion. A subtle erosion of the sanctity of my role. By midday, I realized that the virtual mirror Lily had created wasn't just her story. It had begun to shape how others perceived Emily, and by extension me. The boundaries I had been trying to reinforce in real life were being challenged in the public sphere. And that realization filled me with a mixture of dread and resolve. I needed a plan, a way to protect Emily, assert my role, and maintain compassion for Lily. It was no longer enough to rely on quiet endurance. This was a battle of presence, perception, and principle. And though the challenge was enormous, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: my love for Emily demanded courage, clarity, and the strength to navigate even the murkiest waters of family, grief, and public scrutiny. The living room felt smaller than it was that afternoon, crowded with the hum of conversation and the clinking of dishes. Emily was perched in her high chair, her tiny legs swinging, eyes wide, as she watched the world unfold around her. I had hoped for a calm family gathering, a chance to breathe, to feel normalcy in the chaos of our lives. But peace is a fragile illusion in my house these days, easily shattered by Lily's presence and the eyes of those who didn't understand the subtle war over my daughter. Moments after we sat down, Lily arrived. Of course, she did not late, not early, but with the sense of perfect timing that made it impossible to ignore her. She had Emily in her arms, soft laughter on her lips, cradling her with the ease of someone who had convinced the world she had equal claim. I took a deep breath, trying to summon the calm I needed. "Emily's been napping. She's hungry," I said lightly, hoping to guide the scene back into familiar territory. Lily tilted her head, a subtle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I just brought her out to stretch a bit," she said softly. "She loves company." The room fell into an uneasy rhythm. My mother-in-law watched quietly, a faint frown tugging at her brow, as if trying to decipher whether she should intervene or let the tension simmer. Jake sat beside me, half focused on conversation, half sensing the storm brewing beside him. Then came the small, almost invisible acts that made my heart sink. Lily handed Emily a spoon, letting her tiny hands make a mess with the mashed sweet potatoes I had prepared. "Look at her go," Lily whispered, as if every smile, every flubbed bite, belonged to her. Comments and laughter from family members made me feel like an outsider in my own home. My authority, my role as Emily's mother, felt like it was evaporating in plain sight. The subtle sabotage didn't stop there. During dessert, Lily insisted on carrying Emily to the sofa, positioning her on her lap while the rest of us enjoyed pie. "She wants to watch us," Lily said, voice soft but firm. Emily cooed and wriggled comfortably into Lily's arms. My chest tightened. I wanted to speak up, to reclaim my daughter, but any misstep could make me look petty in front of family. The whispers began almost immediately. My mother-in-law leaned toward Jake, speaking low, cautious. "She's just helping. Let her be." Their voices were careful, polite, but the message was clear: intervened strongly, and I would be seen as unreasonable. My internal panic escalated, a mix of frustration and helplessness boiling beneath my composed exterior. I remembered the long walks I had taken earlier in the week, imagining how I would handle situations like this. But now, in the middle of the room, with eyes on me and Emily in Lily's arms, theory met reality, and reality was exhausting. The tipping point arrived when one of Jake's cousins commented on Emily's laughter. "She's so animated with Lily. Does she do that with you too?" The words, innocuous on the surface, cut deep. Every syllable felt like a challenge, a subtle undermining of the bond I had nurtured with Emily from the day she was born. I wanted to correct them, to assert my presence, but I realized that words might not suffice. This was not a matter of simple misperception. It was a challenge to my authority, my maternal instinct, played out in public under the watchful eyes of family who were already divided in their sympathies. After dinner, I retreated to the nursery, Emily finally asleep, and tried to process the storm. The interactions, subtle as they were, had left my emotions in tatters. I loved Lily and empathized with her grief, but love and empathy did not erase the fact that my boundaries had been breached repeatedly. Now, in front of family members whose opinions mattered to Jake and me, I began to plan silently, carefully. I would need to navigate these gatherings with precision, ensuring that Emily's routines and comfort remained paramount. I had to assert my role as her mother without creating an irreparable rift in the family. A delicate balance between authority and diplomacy, love and enforcement. That night, lying beside Jake, I recounted the day quietly, careful not to let anger spill over. "I know she's grieving," I whispered, "but these repeated acts, they undermine me, and they confuse Emily. I can't let it continue." Jake, tired and well-meaning, nodded slowly. "I know, but I don't want to hurt her feelings either." I closed my eyes, feeling the tension twist through my chest. The problem wasn't just Lily. It was the ripple effect, the way family, friends, and public perception all converged to challenge my role. And I realized that the fight for Emily's well-being, for the clarity of her bond with me, was only just beginning. The interference of family, once a minor concern, had now become a strategic battlefield. I needed to be more deliberate, more confident, more unwavering. My love for Emily demanded it, and my understanding of Lily's grief could not justify sacrificing the security and clarity every child deserves from their mother. The notification sound on my phone had become a familiar jolt to my system, a small alarm that warned of another intrusion into my private life. That afternoon, as I was preparing Emily's bottle, I glanced at the screen and felt a sharp pang of disbelief. Lily had posted yet another photo. Emily, smiling innocently at the camera, nestled against Lily's shoulder, the caption reading, "Our little girl, the joy of my heart." I dropped the bottle in my hands. My chest tightened, and a wave of panic hit me, hot, immediate, uncontrollable. This wasn't just an internal battle anymore. The world could see my daughter through Lily's narrative, and they were buying it. The likes, the comments, the reactions, it all added fuel to a fire I hadn't asked to start. Friends from college, old acquaintances, even people I barely knew commented freely. "She's beautiful. Looks just like Lily. Such a sweet bond, you two. Can't wait to see her grow up with both of you as moms." Each one was a needle in my chest, a reminder that my maternal role was being publicly questioned, undermined, and redefined without my consent. Jake, seeing my reaction, tried to calm me. "Don't overthink it. She's just grieving, and she loves Emily, that's all." But it wasn't just grief. It wasn't just love. It was a public claim, a narrative being constructed in real time, validated by friends, family, and strangers alike. I felt a wave of helplessness. My daughter, my private world, was on display, filtered through Lily's lens, and the world was applauding her claim. I paced the living room, Emily quietly playing in her crib, oblivious to the storm surrounding her. Each comment felt like a challenge, a question. Who really owns her heart? Who really gets to define her world? And I, her mother, was invisible in the narrative she was being cast in. I realized the social media posts weren't innocent. They were strategic, subtle, and insidious. Lily wasn't simply sharing moments, she was asserting ownership, creating a public perception that she was as central to Emily's life as I was. The emotional impact was sharp, an ache that dug into the core of my identity as a mother. I spent hours analyzing every interaction. Every like, Every comment, every tag painted a picture I didn't authorize. I could see friends questioning my role, wondering if Lily's grief made her the other mother and whether my presence was somehow secondary. It was a horrifying, disorienting feeling, the world outside our home subtly rewriting my private reality. The next day at work, the ripple effects became tangible. A colleague who had seen the post mentioned casually, "Your niece Lily's baby is so adorable. Looks like she's attached to her." I froze. Niece, not daughter. My heart sank. The misperception was spreading, and with it, my anxiety. I realized the battle for Emily wasn't confined to our home anymore. It had spilled into the public sphere. That evening, I sat alone, Emily asleep in her crib, and scrolled through the posts repeatedly. My mind raced with strategies: how to respond, how to assert my boundaries without creating family warfare, how to protect my daughter from a narrative I hadn't agreed to. The line between empathy and authority blurred, leaving me tense, exhausted, and determined. I began to craft silent plans, not confrontation, but careful reclaiming of my role. More time with Emily in ways Lily couldn't post about, routines and rituals that reinforce my presence, subtle redirection during family interactions, and documenting incidents for clarity. The challenge was monumental: to assert authority while maintaining compassion, to balance love and protection with social perception. By nightfall, I realized that the public stage had magnified every private struggle. Every interaction with Lily, every hold, every coup, every photo shared online now had a global audience validating or questioning my maternal role. And in that realization, I found a spark of resolve. My love for Emily was stronger than the likes, comments, and applause. My authority, my presence, and my boundaries would not be defined by someone else's narrative. The night had settled quietly, a deceptive calm over the household. Emily slept soundly in her crib, the soft rise and fall of her chest a steady reminder of what mattered most. I sat in the nursery, the glow of the dim lamp illuminating the soft pink walls, and allowed myself a moment to breathe, but only a moment. The events of the past weeks played relentlessly in my mind, looping like a reel. I could not pause. Lily's actions were no longer simply grief-driven. They had evolved into something more complex, a subtle assertion of influence, reinforced by public validation on social media. Family interference had magnified the tension, and the world outside our home had begun to shape perceptions, framing narratives I had no control over. The question was no longer whether to act, it was how. I traced Emily's tiny fingers with my thumb, a grounding ritual to center my thoughts. Every plan I formed revolved around her well-being, her sense of security, and the reinforcement of my maternal authority. I realized I needed a multi-layered strategy: gentle, firm, and deliberate. First, I needed to reclaim presence without confrontation. Simple acts: feeding Emily, guiding her routines, holding her during play were subtle assertions of maternal authority. Nothing flashy, nothing public, just consistent, steady reinforcement of my role. Every meal, every bath, every bedtime ritual became a deliberate act of establishing my primary influence. Second, I needed to create boundaries with Lily that were non-negotiable, yet compassionate. I imagined carefully worded conversations, phrasing my assertions in a way that respected her grief while making clear that Emily's care and comfort would not be compromised. I visualized scenarios in my head, politely asking her to step aside during routines, setting time limits, and maintaining a calm but unwavering tone. Third, I needed to anticipate social scrutiny. The online posts, the comments, the public perception, they were outside my immediate control, but I could influence them indirectly. By documenting interactions, sharing moments of my own care privately with close family, and reinforcing routines visibly yet calmly, I could re-establish clarity in a way that wasn't combative but undeniable. Jake's role became central in this strategy. I needed him as an ally, not merely a bystander. But convincing him required careful diplomacy. I imagined conversations where I would explain my perspective calmly, emphasizing not blame or resentment, but the necessity of safeguarding Emily's emotional environment. He needed to understand that boundaries were not arbitrary, they were essential for stability. I also allowed myself to explore the emotional landscape. Fear, anger, jealousy, and guilt swirled in a storm I had to navigate. Acknowledging these feelings, rather than suppressing them, gave me insight into my instincts and motivations. I realized that clarity came not from denying emotion, but from understanding it. Channeling it into deliberate, measured action. As I prepared mentally for future interactions with Lily, I envisioned a mental framework: observe, assert, reinforce, and redirect. Each interaction with Emily in Lily's presence became a practice in calm authority, a demonstration of maternal bond, a subtle reminder to everyone watching that I was present, consistent, and unwavering. I reflected on empathy. Lily's grief was real, profound, and deserving of acknowledgement. But empathy did not mean surrendering my role, and compassion did not require sacrifice of Emily's stability. Love, I realized, had many dimensions: protective love, nurturing love, empathetic love. All of these had to coexist, but boundaries were the guiding principle. By the end of the night, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The public stage, the interference of family, the subtle claims of Lily, all of it could be managed, navigated, and balanced. My role as Emily's mother was not negotiable. It was a foundation, a responsibility, and a source of profound strength. I whispered softly, more to myself than to anyone else, I will protect you, guide you, and love you with clarity and courage. Nothing will diminish what we share, and no one will redefine the boundaries that matter. In that quiet reflection, I realized the path forward would require patience, diplomacy, and courage. It would require me to embrace complexity, to balance love with authority, and to navigate a world where private bonds were increasingly under public scrutiny. But I was ready. I had to be. Emily's world, her stability, and our bond depended on it. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the living room floor where Emily sat in her playpen, gurgling and cooing as she batted at a soft rattle. I had barely finished preparing her snack when Lily appeared at the doorway, her presence calm but deliberate. Like a storm approaching under a clear sky. I thought I'd help with Emily, she said, her voice soft, almost innocent. She seemed a little restless. I swallowed, my throat tight. She's fine. She's playing. But Lily stepped forward, hands already reaching toward Emily. Let me just pick her up for a minute, she said. Her smile was warm, convincing, but I felt the familiar jolt of alarm in my chest. This wasn't just affection, it was possession, subtle and persistent. I moved in front of Emily, placing a hand gently yet firmly on her tiny torso. No, she's staying here with me for now. The smile faltered slightly. I just want to comfort her, Lily insisted, tilting her head. Her eyes flicked toward Jake, silently seeking support. Jake cleared his throat, uneasy. Maybe just a minute? She's been happy with you before. I felt the tension coil inside me like a spring ready to snap. This was the pattern: the triangulation, the subtle undermining of my authority, and the public validation she had cultivated over weeks. My voice stayed calm, even as my pulse raced. Jake, it's okay. I've got this. Emily needs consistency right now. Lily's brow furrowed, a shadow of frustration crossing her face. I know, she's been through so much. I want to be there for her. I exhaled slowly, forcing patience to the surface. I understand. I really do. But she's my daughter, and right now, she needs her mother. The house felt heavier after Lily left, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension of the confrontation. I sat on the couch, Emily asleep in my arms, and allowed myself a moment, just a brief, fragile moment, to feel the exhaustion settle into my bones. My chest still throbbed with the echo of anger, the burn of frustration, and the ache of sadness. Jake hovered nearby, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. His eyes held concern, but also an unspoken question. Did I handle that well? Did I push too far? I couldn't answer him. My mind was tangled in a labyrinth of emotions, looping endlessly between self-doubt and resolve. I thought about Lily, her grief, her loss, her desperate need to be seen as part of Emily's life. Compassion warred with indignation. I understood her pain. I empathized deeply. Yet empathy did not erase the boundaries she had violated, nor did it lessen the sense of intrusion that had hollowed my chest during the confrontation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had agonized over how to be fair, how to balance patience and authority, only to realize that fairness wasn't always recognized, and balance wasn't always possible. The emotional fallout was relentless. Every smile from Emily, every coo, every tiny hand grasping mine reminded me of what was at stake, but also highlighted the vulnerability of her trust. I replayed the confrontation in my mind over and over. Lily's soft insistence, Jake's hesitation, my own measured tone. I wondered if I had been too firm, too soft, too measured, too visible. The questions spiraled, a chorus of doubt that refused to be silenced. Then came the subtle consequences. Messages from friends who had seen Lily's posts, casual comments from relatives, even Jake's colleagues who asked innocuous questions all carried undertones of judgment. She seems so happy with Lily, doesn't she? Are you okay with sharing time like that? Each one, small as it seemed, felt like a test of my authority, my credibility, my role as Emily's mother. I sank into the couch, letting my head rest against Emily's soft hair, inhaling her scent. The comfort was temporary, a fragile island in a sea of tension. Grief and frustration coexisted uneasily within me. I loved Lily for her heart. I wanted to support her, and yet I hated the way her actions challenged my presence. In those quiet hours, I reflected on the emotional landscape. The confrontation had been necessary, unavoidable even, but it had left wounds small, invisible ones that would take time to heal. The fallout wasn't just between Lily and me. It rippled through Jake, through family, through the network of eyes watching us. I realized something crucial. My response to this emotional fallout would define the coming days. Succumbing to anger would create distance, potentially fracture relationships, and confuse Emily. Ignoring the feelings entirely would invite resentment and erode my authority. The challenge was to navigate the aftermath with clarity, to protect Emily's emotional world while preserving compassion for Lily. That night, after Jake finally drifted to sleep, I sat in the dim glow of the nursery lamp, Emily lying beside me, tiny fingers twitching in dreams. I allowed myself to cry quietly, not for Lily, not even entirely for the confrontation, but for the raw exhaustion of motherhood. The emotional weight of defending what was mine while balancing love and empathy. Through the tears, I made silent promises. I would remain firm, calm, and deliberate. I would guard Emily's routines, her comfort, her trust, and I would maintain an awareness of Lily's grief not as a justification, but as a reminder to act with integrity and patience. I knew the days ahead would bring new challenges, public scrutiny, family opinions, and perhaps even new provocations from Lily. But I also knew that my love, my vigilance, and my unwavering presence in Emily's life would form the bedrock of her security. By the time dawn broke, painting soft gold across the nursery, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The emotional fallout had been raw, exhausting, and humbling, but it had also clarified my role, my boundaries, and my strategy. The confrontation was over, but the journey had just begun. I whispered softly to Emily, brushing a lock of hair from her face. No matter what happens, I will protect you. I will be here always. And together, we will navigate this world, one day at a time. The room grew still. Even the soft gurgle of Emily seemed to fade in the tension that had filled the space. Lily's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm sorry, she said finally, but her eyes betrayed disappointment, a silent accusation. Jake shifted uneasily between us. Let's everyone calm down, he murmured. His gaze flicked to Emily, whose wide eyes seemed to sense the discord, her tiny hands reaching out for comfort. I crouched down beside her, gathering her gently into my arms. See, we're okay, I whispered, stroking her hair. The warmth of her trust and dependence grounded me, reaffirming why I had to stand firm. Lily stepped back, a mixture of sorrow and frustration evident in her posture. She looked at me, eyes glistening. I didn't mean to upset you. I know, I said softly, though my heart still ached from the confrontation. I just need you to understand that some things are non-negotiable. Her routines, her comfort, her security, those are my responsibility. The tension didn't vanish immediately. Lily lingered near the doorway, a silent observer now rather than an active participant. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair, clearly stressed. The atmosphere remained taut, charged with emotions that had no immediate resolution. Later, as Lily left, the living room felt quieter than before, but the aftermath lingered. I sat with Emily in my arms, rocking her gently, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. The showdown had been inevitable, a collision of love, grief, and maternal instinct. I realized then that this was only the beginning. Boundaries had been tested, roles had been challenged, and the emotional stakes had risen. The days ahead would require vigilance, courage, and careful navigation of the intricate web of relationships surrounding Emily. Even as I whispered softly to her, assuring her of my presence and love. I knew the path forward was fraught with tension and conflict, but also with clarity. I had taken the first step in asserting my role, and though the journey would be long, the foundation had been laid. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window, but it did nothing to brighten the pit in my stomach. I had barely finished feeding Emily when a new wave of notifications lit up my phone. Lily had posted yet another photo of Emily, this time at the park, wrapped in her arms, captioned, "Our princess enjoying the sun, my heart belongs to her." I stared at the screen, frozen. Every like, every comment, every emoji felt like a silent accusation. "She's lucky to have both of you," someone wrote. "You're both such loving moms." The casual compliments stung sharply. My daughter, my Emily, was being framed publicly as someone else's child in equal measure to mine. Jake glanced over, sensing my tension. "Maybe we shouldn't look," he suggested, but the damage was done. The public narrative had taken on a life of its own. Friends, colleagues, distant relatives, all unaware of the nuanced reality, had adopted Lily's portrayal. My maternal authority was being subtly questioned, my role reframed by the digital world. I felt anger, frustration, helplessness, and fear twist inside me. Emily, blissfully unaware, reached for her toy, her laughter a bittersweet reminder of what was at stake. Each smile from her emphasized the responsibility I bore, not just to protect her physical safety, but to preserve the clarity of her identity, her emotional boundaries, and her sense of security. I spent hours crafting mental strategies, how to reclaim visibility in our child's life without escalating conflict publicly, how to assert boundaries subtly but effectively, and how to maintain empathy for Lily while protecting my daughter. Every action now had a layer of public scrutiny I hadn't anticipated. Transforming private conflicts into a digital spectacle, the public backlash was exhausting. Magnifying the small, private tensions into a storm I had to weather daily. And yet, I knew that yielding was not an option. I needed a plan, a clear, deliberate approach to manage Emily's well-being, my relationship with Lily, and the perceptions of everyone watching. By evening, I felt the weight of the world pressing in. But amidst the storm of likes and comments, a resolve crystallized. I would reclaim my presence, assert my role, and protect Emily, no matter how uncomfortable or challenging. The public stage had amplified everything, but it had also sharpened my determination. That night, as Emily slept soundly, I sat in the quiet nursery, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The confrontation, the emotional fallout, the public scrutiny, it had all brought clarity. The tension had reached a peak, and now I understood that the way forward required strategy, courage, and unwavering focus. I outlined my plan, direct, calm assertion of my role with Emily, visible to anyone observing, but without aggression or public confrontation. Clear boundaries for Lily, communicated respectfully but firmly, emphasizing Emily's routines and comfort over all else. Collaboration with Jake, ensuring he understood and supported these boundaries, acting as an ally rather than a passive observer. Private reinforcement of Emily's emotional security, nurturing our bond in ways Lily could not disrupt or misrepresent. I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of emotions: grief for the tension, anger at the encroachment, love for Emily, empathy for Lily, but I refused to let them dictate actions. Instead, I transformed them into clarity and determination. In that moment, I realized the turning point. The path forward would not be about confrontation or public validation, it would be about deliberate, consistent presence, careful communication, and unshakable commitment to my daughter. I was no longer reacting to Lily's claims or the scrutiny of others. I was leading, guiding, and protecting the emotional world of the child who depended on me most. I whispered softly to Emily, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead, "We've been through so much already, but we're stronger. I will always be here, and I will always protect you." Nothing and no one can change that. The tension of the past weeks had distilled into clarity. The public stage, the family interference, the private confrontations, they had tested me, exhausted me, and challenged every instinct. But they had also prepared me for the next phase, asserting control over my child's environment, navigating Lily's grief with compassion, and preserving the integrity of our family. The turning point had arrived. I was ready not just to endure but to actively shape Emily's world with love, clarity, and courage. The afternoon sun was softer now, spilling a warm glow across the living room where Emily sat on the carpet, building a tower with colorful blocks. The air was still, almost expectant, as though the house itself knew something had to be said. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the weeks pressing down on me. Today, I would confront Lily not with anger, but with clarity, honesty, and compassion. She entered the room quietly, her eyes immediately seeking Emily's. I could see the mixture of grief, longing, and uncertainty etched into her face. I felt a pang of empathy, but pushed it aside, remembering why I was here: to assert my role, to protect Emily, and to finally put words to what had been simmering beneath the surface. Lily, I began, my voice steady but gentle, we need to talk about Emily. She looked up, startled, then nodded slowly. I know, her voice trailed, fragile. I knelt to be at eye level with her, trying to soften the confrontation while maintaining firmness. I know you love her. I know you've been hurting, and I understand that grief. But the way things have been happening, picking her up without asking, posting photos online has been confusing for her, and it's been difficult for me. Her lips trembled, and she blinked back tears. I didn't mean to hurt you, or Emily. I understand, I said, reaching out to touch her hand briefly. But we need boundaries. Emily needs consistency, clarity, and security. That means I'm her mother, her routines, her care, her environment. You can love her, be part of her life, but it has to be in a way that respects that. Lily's eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and relief, a hesitant smile forming. I want to do the right thing. I don't want to make things harder for you or her. I know, I replied softly. And I want you in her life too, but we have to be careful, deliberate. Our love for her can coexist, but it can't compete. I need you to understand that. She nodded, swallowing hard, a visible shift in her posture signaling the weight of her understanding. I do, I really do. I'm sorry for overstepping. We sat in silence for a moment, watching Emily stack blocks, her laughter and clapping filling the room with a reminder of why this confrontation mattered. I felt the tension between us begin to ease, replaced by a cautious truce, a mutual recognition of boundaries and intentions. I'll do my best, Lily said quietly, for her. And I'll follow your lead when it comes to routines and care. I appreciate that, I replied, my voice warm but unwavering. We can find a balance, one that's healthy for Emily, and one where you can still love her without confusion or interference. The room felt lighter after that conversation. Not perfect, there would be moments of tension, missteps, and learning, but a framework had been established. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope, knowing that clarity had been communicated and that Emily's well-being could take precedence over confusion and rivalry. As Lily quietly played beside Emily, occasionally offering a gentle smile or soft coo, I felt a profound sense of relief. This confrontation hadn't been about winning or losing, it had been about love, clarity, and boundaries. And in that understanding, I found peace. The weekend arrived, bringing with it the subtle tension of family visits. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh laundry, a comforting domesticity that contrasted sharply with the emotional minefield I was about to navigate. Jake and I had agreed, today, clarity would extend beyond Lily. Our families needed to understand boundaries, respect roles, and above all, support Emily. I watched as my mother-in-law arrived, her arms carrying a small basket of snacks for Emily. She smiled warmly, but I sensed the flicker of concern, a silent question about the recent confrontations. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that patience and clarity would be my tools. Mom, I'd like to talk, I began, gesturing for her to sit. About Emily, our routines and boundaries. Her eyes widened slightly, curiosity mixed with caution. Of course, dear. Go ahead, I explained gently but firmly. Emily is our priority. Jake and I have routines, caregiving structures, and ways of interacting that are essential for her emotional stability. That means everyone, family included, needs to respect these routines and support our roles as her parents. She nodded slowly, processing the words. I see. So you mean Lily's involvement needs to be more structured? Yes, I said, choosing my words carefully. Lily loves Emily, and we want her in her life, but there have to be boundaries. No taking Emily without permission, no sharing photos that suggest parental claims, and respect for the routines we've established. The shift in her expression was subtle but unmistakable, a recognition of the truth, a willingness to support, rather than interfere. Jake joined in, adding his voice. We've been trying to navigate this carefully, but we need everyone's help. Boundaries aren't meant to exclude anyone, they're meant to protect Emily and ensure she grows up in a secure environment. My mother-in-law reached out, taking my hand gently. I understand now. I'll support you both, and I'll make sure Lily does too. It's Emily's well-being that matters. The conversation moved to extended family, text messages, and casual interactions with relatives, all of which I addressed calmly. Each scenario was an opportunity to clarify, assert, and build consensus. Emily's care was our shared responsibility, but ultimate decisions rested with her parents. Later, during a casual family lunch, I observed the dynamics shift. Comments became supportive rather than advisory. Suggestions about schedules or sharing time with Emily were met with polite acknowledgement rather than subtle challenge. A sense of alignment began to emerge, and understanding that boundaries weren't a restriction but a framework for healthy, loving involvement. I felt a quiet relief, knowing that the family unit could be a source of support rather than tension. Jake squeezed my hand across the table, a silent acknowledgement of our shared victory. We were united, clear, and prepared. By the end of the day, the house felt lighter, more harmonious. Emily giggled as she crawled around the living room, her eyes bright and carefree, oblivious to the complex negotiations that had secured her safety and stability. The sense of accomplishment was profound. Clarity had been communicated, understanding achieved, and the path forward illuminated. As the evening descended, I reflected quietly. The confrontation with Lily had established personal boundaries, the public fallout had clarified the stakes, and now the family's alignment provided a supportive backdrop. For the first time in weeks, I felt a profound sense of control, responsibility, and peace. Emily yawned, curling into my lap as I brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. I whispered softly, "You're safe, loved, and at the center of our world. Everyone knows it now, and we'll make sure it stays that way." The glow of my phone illuminated the dim living room as I scrolled through notifications. Weeks of subtle tensions, confrontations, and social media posts had created a digital whirlwind that seemed impossible to navigate. Lily's latest post, innocuous in its tone but loaded with implications, had reignited a wave of public speculation. I took a deep breath. This time, I would address it not with anger, not with defensiveness, but with clarity. My goal was simple: protect Emily, assert my role as her mother, and communicate a balanced, compassionate message to anyone watching. I began typing slowly, choosing each word deliberately. Emily is our daughter. She is loved, nurtured, and cared for by both her parents. Lily is part of her extended family, and we appreciate the love she brings into Emily's life. Our priority is her well-being, her routines, and her security. Thank you for respecting our role as her parents. I paused, reading the message aloud to myself. It was firm, clear, and devoid of judgment. It acknowledged Lily's role without undermining my authority, reaffirmed Emily's position, and communicated boundaries to the public in a way that was respectful yet unmistakable. Posting it felt like a release. The tension I had carried, the second-guessing, the anxiety over what others might think began to dissipate. This was not about control or ego. It was about transparency, clarity, and the protection of a child whose life had been inadvertently made public. The responses were immediate, but calmer than I had feared. Friends and family expressed understanding, gratitude, and support. A few strangers left comments that I chose to ignore, their voices irrelevant to the reality of our family. The post served its purpose, a gentle but clear assertion of truth and boundaries, visible to all, leaving no room for ambiguity. Jake came to sit beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "That was perfect," he whispered. "Calm, clear, and strong. Exactly what Emily needs." I nodded, feeling the relief settle deep into my bones. The digital world had been tamed, not entirely, but enough that it no longer dictated my peace or dictated the perception of my role as a mother. I had acted with intention, clarity, and compassion. Emily stirred in her crib, reaching out as if sensing the shift in energy. I scooped her up, feeling the warmth of her small body against mine. "See?" I whispered. "We're okay. You're safe, loved, and everything that matters is protected." For the first time in weeks, I felt a measure of control over the narrative that had threatened to spiral. Boundaries were respected publicly, authority reasserted, and compassion preserved. The tension that had dominated our lives was finally beginning to resolve, not with confrontation, but with clarity and purpose. As I watched Emily's eyes light up with trust and recognition, I knew the final step would be creating lasting peace within our home and family. The public clarity had set the stage. Now, the private world needed the same resolution. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow through the nursery window. Emily sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by her favorite toys, her laughter filling the space with an effortless joy. I watched her, heart full, realizing that the storm of the past weeks had finally begun to settle. Lily knelt beside Emily, gently guiding her little hands to stack blocks. Their interaction was tender, patient, and respectful. I observed silently, knowing that boundaries had been honored. Love had been shared appropriately, and my role as Emily's mother remained clear and unwavering. Jake leaned against the doorway, smiling quietly. He caught my eye, and we exchanged a look that needed no words, an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey we had endured together. We had faced tension, grief, public scrutiny, and familial pressures, yet we had emerged stronger, united, and clear in our purpose. I stepped closer, placing a hand on Emily's back as she leaned into Lily's gentle guidance. "See," I whispered, "everyone loves you, and you're safe. This is your world, and it's filled with love." Lily smiled softly, meeting my gaze with gratitude. "Thank you for understanding, for guiding me, and for letting me be part of her life in the right way," she said. Her voice carried sincerity and relief, a shared recognition that the hardest part of love sometimes meant knowing where to step back. The family gathered in the living room, casually sharing snacks and laughter. Conversation flowed easily, naturally, without tension or unspoken conflicts. It was a rare moment of harmony, where every member understood their role, their place, and their responsibility toward Emily's well-being. As I held Emily in my arms, feeling the warmth of her tiny body, I reflected on everything we had navigated, the confrontations, the public scrutiny, the emotional highs and lows. Each challenge had tested patience, compassion, and resilience. Each had also taught a profound lesson: love was not about possession, authority alone, or unchecked affection. It was about balance, boundaries, understanding, and unwavering presence. I whispered to Emily, brushing a soft curl from her forehead, "We've made it, sweetheart. We've faced the storm, and we've come out stronger. You are loved, protected, and at the center of our world, always." The room exhaled a collective sigh of peace. Lily's presence no longer carried tension. She was a loving aunt figure who understood her place. Jake and I were aligned, steadfast in our shared responsibility and authority. Family members were supportive, aware, and respectful. And Emily, our bright, curious, resilient Emily, was safe, happy, and surrounded by love. As night fell, I tucked Emily into bed, watching her drift into sleep with soft breathing and relaxed features. I felt a deep, grounding sense of accomplishment and serenity. The battles had been hard, the journey exhausting, but the resolution was complete. Love, clarity, and peace now defined our home. I closed the nursery door quietly, leaning against it for a moment, letting the weight of relief and triumph sink in. This was the life I had fought to protect, the life Emily deserved. And as I turned toward the living room, I knew that the foundations we had built, trust, boundaries, understanding, and compassion, would guide us through any future storm. For the first time in what felt like forever, the world seemed balanced, safe, and whole. And I, as Emily's mother, stood firmly at the center, confident, calm, and ready for every chapter that lay ahead.